What if I told you that ON1 Photo Raw had an AI portrait editing tool that makes it really easy to get a great look that looks like professional retouching on your portrait images? If you don't believe me, stay tuned because that's what we're going to be looking at. ON1 Photo Raw Portrait AI. Let's go. So here we are inside of ON1 Photo Raw with the photo that we're going to be working on today. Now, before we get too deep, I'm going to go ahead and hit Command and comma. This is going to bring up my preferences menu because what I want to show you is if you use Brilliance AI on a regular basis, you can apply Portrait AI when you enact Brilliance AI by checking this little drop down right here for Apply Portrait AI to Prominent Faces. Now, once you have that set, if you turn it on, great. If you turn it off, that's up to you. Either way, it's going to be fine. So if you turn it on and then you hit Brilliance AI, it will activate and then it will generate the AI adjustment, or at least make a mask of the face. Now, I do not have that set. So what I'm going to do is show you the manual way of turning on Portrait AI. And that's by coming over here to Portrait inside of the tab section here. Now, if you're not seeing that, what you want to do is come over to the three-line menu and then go down to Portrait and make sure that it has a check mark next to it. If it doesn't, it'll disappear just like that. But I want to go ahead and make sure that there is a check mark next to it. So I'm going to click on it again, and then it pops back up in my menu bar here. So if I click that, it doesn't do anything. Oh no, it's broken. Now, I'm just kidding. It's not. So what you really need to do is click on the little person icon here where it says Add Face. ON1 is going to give you this little box. You can just click and drag, and I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but you're just going to make a box around the person's face. Now, this is not a completely free-form box, so just make sure that whatever is in the box covers up the face as much as possible. Once that's done, you're going to hit this little blue OK box. And ON1 is going to think itself through. And look at that. It made a perfect mask. Not quite. So what we need to do is work with the masking tools. And this is no different than any other masking. So don't be intimidated. I'm just going to go ahead and click on my masking layer here. And what I like to do is just make this all on my own. So what I'm going to do is we're going to grab, we already have a brush. I'm just going to make it really, really large. And I'm just going to paint over all of this. So I'm not making a selection of her face at all. And then what I'm going to do is use my favorite masking tool, which is the Quick Brush AI masking tool. I really do enjoy this tool. All I did was hit W on my keyboard and it's going to activate that for me. So we'll let ON1 think itself through here and then we'll get that running here in a bit. Okay, so now that it's got done thinking itself through, I'm just going to hover over her face. It's selecting her whole skin there. So let's see if we can maybe get just one little part of her, but doesn't look like it's going to, so that's fine. I'll just click here. It's going to select everything, and then I'll jump over to my brush tool. Okay, so now that it has all of that, I'm just going to go ahead and manually erase everything else out. So again, just like any other mask, you just paint away the areas that you don't want this to apply. And I have now created my mask. All right. Sometimes when you activate Brilliance AI with when you activate Portrait AI using Brilliance AI, it will make this mask for you. And one thing that I will caution is removing any jewelry, and you also don't need the ear in the mask. So we'll do something like that. And I think that we have a good mask. So I'm going to hit the letter O to close out my masking bug here, or my masking overlay, and we're going to come back over here to the tool. So let's go ahead and minimize everything, and we're just going to build this up. So the first thing is opacity. That's pretty straightforward. It's a standard piece on all of the AI tools or filters inside of ON1, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. Then you have styles, and styles are essentially exactly what they are in every other filter, where you can create a style and then save it. I don't actually have any created because I find that every person's skin is going to need something different based off of whatever the lighting looks like and what their skin condition is. So styles I just don't find value added. With that being said, skin is the meat and potatoes of this particular filter. Obviously it's turned off right now, so I'm going to go ahead and click this little circle to activate it. And I love that everything is kind of just set to default standards. We're going to go ahead and zoom in on our model here by clicking right in the middle of her face. That just makes sure that we're able to see what's happening when we start moving these sliders. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and grab the retouching slider and pull this over to 100%. The reason I pull it up to 100% is because I want to see everything that's happening to my model's face as I'm applying these adjustments. All right. The next thing down is going to be the method. Now you have two options here: surface blur and frequency separation. Today's tutorial, we're only going to be looking at frequency separation because that's the one that I use the most whenever I'm using this tool. Maybe if you're interested, let me know. I'll make a surface blur one at a later video. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start working with blemishes. Now this reduces blemishes like acne, pores, and fine lines like concealer. All right. So if you're familiar with makeup, it's just going to cover up like those small imperfections on the face. So as I pull this to the right, we'll just see some of those little areas on the face kind of start to fade away. All right. But what it's also doing, if we look over here at the nose, it's lightening those areas to the point that they're losing contrast. So you want to be very careful with this slider. I usually like to leave the blemishes slider until a little bit later. Then you have detail, and based off of what ON1 says, it adds detail to the skin texture. So skin has texture. We don't have like this blurry, super smooth skin like this. All right. That's not normal. But we also don't have like crazy splotchy skin like this. So the detail slider, in my opinion, is like, how do you keep the skin looking as natural as possible when you edit it? So maybe around here, it looks pretty good. Then we'll hover over to the smoothing slider, and this smooths the skin like a foundation. So one is like concealer, the other one is like a foundation. So we'll pull it all the way to the left, and you can see there's a lot of imperfections in her skin. And I guess this would be a good time to note that combining Portrait AI with the healing brush or the retouching brush, that's where you really gain some power in using this tool. Case in point, if I come over here and we'll hit the drop down, get the retouch brush. And if I just paint over like these areas that they're not going to go away just because I'm using a slider, like these larger imperfections in the skin, if I just paint those away, then I'm going to get a better result. Now, I'm not going to sit here and paint away all of these because that just is not going to be practical for this tutorial. However, based off of the skin and the model that you're working with, you can absolutely do exactly what I'm doing here. And this is going to yield a better result when you start to apply the Portrait AI sliders to the image. Now, one of the other things that I would caution you on is when you are doing this retouching, as I'm doing right now with just removing certain aspects on her face, you want to leave prominent features like this mole that's right here. I wouldn't get rid of that because that is who she is. It's not going to go away, and it's there. So you should leave it alone. But little imperfections like this little notch in her chin, that can go away. This little bump, things like that. That's what you want to get rid of when you start doing retouching in this regard. And then I'll even get rid of this little thing right down here. So now I have essentially a nicely retouched skin with all of the major imperfections taken care of. And now I can jump right over into the Portrait AI and continue my editing. So if I recall, we left off on smoothing. So as I pull this to the right, you see how her skin, it just smoothens out just a little bit more and it looks really nice. Now, if I feel like it's getting a little too smooth and I'm losing texture in the skin, then I can come back to detail and I can pull up on my detail and you can see how I'm starting to get like realistic skin again. And then of course you still have your blemishes slider. I like to leave this closer towards the end because I don't want to go like overboard with it. So maybe somewhere around 13 looks good on this image. Now, one of the things that I suggest everyone does whenever they're working with Portrait AI or any filter for that matter is you zoom out on your image because you want to see how does this look with the collective of the image. And then I'll turn off the skin adjustment and then turn it back on. Now, if I feel like this is just way too strong, remember, we have this retouching slider here, and this works like an opacity slider, but just for your skin adjustments. Now, there's one more adjustment that I want to take a look at, and that's going to be shine. I always leave texture up to 100% because I want the skin texture to remain. I think that it's weird to pull skin texture all the way down. I think that I want the skin texture that's already in the skin to stay there. But with shine, if I pull that over to the right, you'll see these bright areas, they just get a little less bright. And think of this as like a highlight control almost. It's just minimizing reflections. You don't want to go too far with this because then you start to lose contouring in the face and that just doesn't look the best. But a little bit of shine removal could be helpful based off of the model that you're photographing and what the skin looks like. But there's so many ways of retouching that. So once I have the skin looking just about the way that I want it to, I think that this looks good, but it may be just a little too strong. So what I'm going to do is pull back on the retouching slider. Again, this works like an opacity slider, and I'm going to probably stop it right around here. So if I turn off skin and then turn it back on, you can see it's got an effect, but she still looks natural. It still looks like her skin doesn't look overly retouched. And that's one of the things that I see a lot of people doing with this particular effect, not seasoning it to taste to make it make sense. Instead, just using it as a get out of jail free card or overdoing it to making the skin look way too fake. So it doesn't look that great when it's zoomed in, but when you zoom out, it definitely looks way more realistic and believable. All right. But notice I'm losing some of the contrast around the eyes and also in the nose and maybe even around the lips. So that's something you got to pay attention to because you'll need to re-add that with a local adjustment later down the line. But that's for a different tutorial on a different day. The next step is the face. So we'll expand that by clicking on the text. We'll hit the little blue dot here to turn it on. And this is really easy to use. All right. Either you want to make the face brighter or darker. Her face, I think, is exposed extremely well, so I probably wouldn't do anything more. If anything, I would just pull down on her face, like the brightness on the face, just to darken things, and that brings back some of that contrast that we lost earlier. So that's one way of doing it as well. A feature that I don't use often, and I recommend you use sparingly, is this slim face feature. You can see what it's doing, and to me, it's just not true to the person. But if you were using a wide angle lens, which this one does not look, let's see here. This one was using a 50mm lens. So there's not that much distortion that happens with a 50mm lens. So I'm not overly concerned with this. But let's say you were using a 24 or a 16mm lens and the face was not completely in the center. So there's a little bit of distortion and it makes the face look a little bit more wide, then by all means, go ahead and slim that face down if that makes sense for you. All right. So that's all that I would do with face. Now we'll come over to eyes and we'll activate it. Now, right now, her eyes are not selected. I'm going to go ahead and zoom into the center here and we're going to click on the icon for eyes. This is going to give me the ability to identify the eyes, and I get a little happy face here. I want to put this right on the pupil of both of her eyes, or at least how many of her eyes are in the frame. So if there's only one in the frame, then you go ahead and put this as close to that pupil as you can get it. So I think right here looks good for her right eye or the camera left eye. And then maybe right around here because the catch light is reflecting there. And it starts to apply this overlay. Now, the problem here is it didn't get into the corners of her eye the way that it should. So you have to pull these, and it's really easy. You just click and drag these to the areas where they belong, making sure that you're not going over eyelashes, because the adjustment for the eyes, it is a little feathered, but only a little bit. So if you go over the eyelashes, you could end up with corrections happening over the eyelashes that you don't want, and that just looks weird. So I'm just going to go ahead and reshape this eye, and this one is a little bit more tricky than the other, but still using the same principles, I can get it really close. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you definitely want to make sure that you have a good selection. What it gave me originally was not good. All right. So we don't want that. Now that I have that done, I can come over here to my eye section and you can brighten them. So you can see how that feather, it's just filling in the eye socket. All right. And that's the reason why you want to be careful with having it over the eyelashes, because if I pull this up, you can see now it's starting to look like I put a little bit of highlighter on here, and that's not what I want, right? So be careful with that. But that's way too bright. So we're just going to go ahead and pull this down just a little bit. And I don't even know if I need any brightness in her eyes. Again, zooming out makes sense. Turn off the eye bright or the eye enhancement, turn it back on. The eyes are a little bit brighter, but I won't go crazy. And then of course it already has whitening set to 20, and this is going to be the whites of the eye. Again, be careful here because you could go way too far and then it could just look very unnatural. So that doesn't look too bad, but it's also I can tell that the eyes are way too white. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that back. I think 20 was probably appropriate. I'll leave it at 25 to call it good, and that's fine. And then we have detail. Now detail is fun because if you pull up on the detail, you can get some really sharp eyes. Or if you pull it back, which I usually don't pull back on the detail. I pull it up just a little bit to add a little bit more oomph to the eyes. And then there's a little bit of dark circles under her eyes, right? Because that's the next slider down. If I pull the dark circles to the right, you can see it's just starting to brighten up, and it looks like it's going over her eyes and not even getting under there. So I may not even use it on this particular edit, but on a typical edit, you may want to brighten up these darker areas so that way it doesn't look like the person has bags under their eyes. But it's not working that way for me in this particular case, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull that down. And if I needed to, I could use a local adjustment to correct that. And then the last one here in the eyes is brow enhance. Let's go ahead and pull that up, and you'll see what happens to the eyebrows. They should be getting a little bit darker. And let's turn it off, turn it back on. Interesting. So doesn't want to cooperate with me right now for the eyebrows either. But again, I could use a local adjustment, and that would give me a stronger contrast in the eyebrows. And that's all that's really going to do. All right. So we'll just go ahead and jump over to our last segment, which is mouth. Let's go ahead and click there, turn it on, and you have a few options here. If you want to make the teeth a little bit whiter, you can definitely just pull up on this whitening. I don't know how much it's going to read those teeth, but let's zoom in on her mouth, grab our mouth overlay indicator, and then I'm just going to click on the corners of the mouth. All right. So here's one corner, and here is, we'll say that the second one is about there, but it's going to need some reshaping. So we'll do something like this, and maybe even pull that corner out and up. So something like that. And then you have an inner line. This one is going to go on the bottom lip, just like so. And then you're going to put the second inner line on the inside of the bottom lip, and this gap in between is going to be over your teeth. So if someone has a really big smile, you're going to definitely put that piece there, and then we'll just click and drag to reshape this aspect here until it gets close to where we want it, right? It's not going to be perfect, but you can see I have the upper lip framed between these two lines, the bottom lip framed between these two lines. So now when I increase the teeth whitening, it's just trying to whiten the area that's right in between there. It's not perfect, so be careful with that. Make it make sense for your photo. If you want to whiten teeth, I think that using a local adjustment is probably one of the better ways of doing it, because you have more control using a brush, and you could paint it exactly where it needs to be. Plus, you have control over the color temperature that you want the teeth to be as well. But what this tool is good for is lip vibrance. So if you want to change the lip color just a little bit to make them either a little bit more bright or vibrant, a little bit darker or brighter, you can do that. But I think her lips, they look just fine for this particular photo. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the mouth. Now, that is Portrait AI in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and turn this whole thing off by clicking the radio button here, and you can see what's happening. We'll zoom out. If I turn it back on, you can see how it's just really like contouring her face. The skin looks a little bit more uniform and even versus it being really bright and full of minor blemishes. And then this is reducing it. And I could obviously come back in here and re-edit this even further if I felt like I needed to. So maybe I just wasn't getting enough blemish removal. I can really crank up on that blemish removal. And this makes her face look a little bit more oily, and I don't like that look. So just play around with it for the photos that you're working on. It does work. I do use it from time to time. And I think that this tool is a great addition to have inside of Photo Raw 2025. Now, what I will say is I enjoy editing my portraits manually, but this is just a really quick way of being able to edit your tools. If I wasn't talking through each of the sliders, I probably could have edited this particular image in less than 5 minutes with this particular tool, getting it to look the way that I want it to. So if you want to pick up ON1 Photo Raw or anything over at the ON1 store, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20 to save a little bit of money. I do make a small commission from everyone who uses it, but that's at no extra charge to you. Now, if you want to learn more about photo editing software, consider the video that's popping up on the screen now. And until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.